Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy help define our contemporary world. My guest today is one of India's eminent scientists, a chemist who's published more than 200 papers with perhaps the largest number of citations of any living Indian scientist. He's been the Vice-Chancellor of what is regarded as India's largest university, 1.5 million students, 125 programs, 1,000 courses. This is, of course, the Indira Gandhi National Open University. But he's also been the chairperson of the University Grants Commission and Vice-Chancellor, a long and distinguished career as an academic and as an educational administrator. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Rajasekharan Pillai. Dr. Pillai, with all the sort of vast experience in education, and maybe we can just go back to sort of like a 101 on education, and what is a good education?
Good education means, the opportunity of getting knowledge, opportunity of utilizing knowledge, and then opportunity of creating knowledge in a very effective way.
Don't you think that perhaps there is a mistaken emphasis on knowledge per se in the narrow sense and not the wisdom sense that you mentioned, where just looking at the accumulation of facts, of information, but knowledge is really a training of the mind so that it can continue to apply itself to unfolding knowledge during one's career.
That's right. That's right.
Now tell me that in what ways can distance education, which is your sort of current portfolio, and we'll talk about the other things that you have had such extensive experience about, isn't that one of the great handicaps of distance education, that you're not really interacting one-on-one and being able to shape and mold minds?
No, actually, it's not a handicap in the sense that distance education or open and distance learning is only a tool for education. It will definitely augment the conventional system of education. It should not be seen just as distance education per se. Open and distance learning technology is a tool for getting additional knowledge, additional skills and additional information, and also knowing about the application of knowledge in different contexts. So in that respect, we cannot just say that distance education is something of a handicapped nature. It's not at all. All over the world, distance education is taking almost 50% of the total education responsibilities. But if distance education is just separated from the conventional system of education, then it is definitely a handicap.
But isn't in India that a lot of people are accessing distance education and doing degree programs because they're not really able to access contact education.
Yeah.
So it's becoming a substitute rather than complementing the process. And something like more than 10% of all university education in India is happening through this single institution.
Of course, the substitution of the conventional system of education has to be there in some cases. For example, for continuous capacity building of people, distance education is the choice. But when it comes to fundamental basic education of an externally registered student, definitely it has to be a mixture of the conventional system of education and the distance education component of it.
In terms of the challenge of IGNOU with such a large number of students from so many 35 countries, what would you define sort of as your mission statement? What is the objective?
IGNOU's role has to be inclusive growth, and inclusive growth can be achieved only through inclusive education. That means nobody should be deprived of education opportunities. Even now, with all advances in this country, only 7 to 10% of the relevant age group gets the opportunity of entering into a higher education institution. This is in contrast to over 50 to 80% in the so-called developed countries. And if you just look at development, the real development or real growth of the so-called developed countries, you will identify 3 unavoidable educational parameters. Basic universal literacy. Over 95% of the adults can read, write and count. And the second educational parameter which is characteristic, which is innate of all this real growth, is near universal school education. That means over 80% of the school eligible age children, they get the opportunity of completing school education. And third, when it comes to higher education, I already mentioned only 7 to 10% of the relevant age group gets the opportunity of entering into education. So there is a big gap, and if we try to fill this gap, we need lot of infrastructure, a lot of capabilities to do that. And if we can achieve this filling of this gap, definitely we will be able to achieve growth.
But what indicators do we have that this is qualitatively happening? I know obviously quantitatively, we are a culture that wants certificates and wants to be able to say in their biodata that I have this certificate. Has there been any data that suggests that people who have completed these processes are getting better jobs or getting higher salaries, and real value is being added?
You mean
not just employability in a certificate
You mean
sense.
those who are getting
out of IGNOU?
Definitely out of IGNOU, large number of students coming out of the system, they are learning not just by any compulsion. Most of the students of IGNOU, they are learning by choice. They opt for it, and there is a lot of flexibility in the learning methods and learning procedure. There is no compulsion of completing the course in a particular time, and therefore there is some sort of an innate interest in pursuing education and getting knowledge. And we have seen in some of the capacity building programs, maybe.
But is it, sorry to interrupt, is it really getting knowledge or getting that certificate? Because this is not a problem just limited to IGNOU. You have been chairperson of the University Grants Commission, and I think there is a great fear that even in higher education in general, that the pyramid is very narrow, that we have so many degree holders who are unemployed, who don't really have knowledge that can be applied but have a certificate.
This is, of course, this is a problem of not understanding the real context of the knowledge. Many of them may be, of course, most of them may be getting the knowledge and skills, but they are totally unaware of the context of this knowledge.
Are you addressing issues such as that? Is that your
yes, that is the real.
And in what
that's the
ways?
real issue we
in what
are
ways
addressing.
are you addressing that?
For example, only when a person who has the knowledge and skills, he understands the context of that knowledge and skills, he can apply that knowledge and skills in the right perspective.
So how does IGNOU try and cultivate that?
In IGNOU, most of the students, they are looking at the context. For example, they may be working in a particular area. It's in a capacity building program. They may be working as teachers, and they feel that their teaching is not getting the right attention, or they cannot really teach in the way they want. And then they opt for a certificate program on capacity building of the teacher training program. And that means by choice they are coming to this one. And by undergoing this program, they may not be getting an additional degree or separate or anything, but they are really understanding the context of the application of their knowledge, and this context is the thing which the distance education system is providing. In that way, there is the real correct mix of the text and context of education in distance education and open and distance learning program, and the real pedagogy or the real philosophy behind open and distance learning education is that the learner understands the text of education and the context of education. Only a person who understands the text and context will have the real knowledge application.
We'll come to more of that in a moment. You're watching a conversation with Dr. Rajasekharan Pillai, the Vice Chancellor of the Indira Gandhi National Open University. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Dr. Rajasekharan Pillai, Vice Chancellor of the Indira Gandhi National Open University, a former chairperson of the University Grants Commission, and a distinguished scientist. You've had a lifelong passion and interest in education, and I started this conversation asking you what a good education is. But are you satisfied that we are making the kind of qualitative leap forward that we're talking about a 10% growth in the economy. It's not just economics, but civil society, industry, nation building that needs educated people, that needs a supply from the educational process that is qualitatively capable of breaking new ground. You're a scientist. I mean, where do we stand in science education? The Professor Swaminathan has described, a lot of our software successes as, people being techno-coolies. And we're not really making that kind of breakthrough. Where do we lack? We're always looking at so many people, so many percentages, cash inputs. What can we do qualitatively impact this?
Of course, I do agree that there is a decline in the quality of education fundamentals in the area of fundamental sciences and humanities and social sciences. This has happened because of the neglect of the real university system in the country. If you just look at the qualitative parameters of, in the case of fundamentals, achievements in fundamental sciences, if you trace back some 15 or 20, maybe 25 years back, you will see that most of the academy fellows in the various academies of sciences were from the universities in the country. Now, if you take the total percentage of academy fellows, science academy fellows, maybe Indian Academy of Sciences, Indian National Science Academy or National Academy of Sciences, you will see that only very few, less than maybe 5% are from the university system. The reason behind this qualitative decline is that we have neglected the basic sciences, humanities, social sciences, education in our universities.
When we say neglected, who is neglected? Is this because we haven't, our political leadership hasn't seen its emphasis? I mean, after all, you had Nehru talking about the scientific temper and IITs, and seemed to have certainly from the very outset the philosophical vision and the philosophical commitment to this. Or is it that they're just poorly paid and there isn't a living in it? What are the elements?
No, definitely it is a problem of the education administration also, in the sense that we have looked at more job generating areas and all that. We looked at the so-called emerging areas. We looked at professional education. Of course, these are all important things. But in the name of the so-called professional education and vocational education, what we have done is we have compartmentalized education. For example, we have created systems which are designed only for professional education. We have created single faculty universities. The very concept of a university is that a university should have all imaginable faculties in its place. This has not happened during the last several years. For example, if you just look at many of the breakthroughs in fundamental sciences, you will see that it has all happened in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary areas.
So where is the impetus for this going to come from? I mean, why aren't the scientists standing up and screaming, foul murder? You have been an administrator, you're a scientist.
It is definitely the scientists, the teachers, we are advocating for that. But even then, the real input, I'm mentioning about the financial input to the higher education or the university education is the real problem.
But you're a rare scientist who's an academic, who's an administrator. You've got a patent. You've actually demonstrated that your work, is commercially viable, has a real world application to it. But that hasn't happened. I mean, it's a chicken and the egg. On the one hand, the system will say that, well, we really can't afford to invest in this, and let's import all the applied technology that we need, and we forget even fundamental scientific research. Where and how are we going to begin to break this?
Yeah. For example, we talk about the Indian Institute of Science, Indian Institute of Technologies and all that. The way in which these institutions are running, they are managed, this is not happening in the state university system in the country. Even in the central university system, the things are totally different. And also, it is very important that we have to see that in the university system, we should have teaching, research and extension simultaneously happening. After independence, in most of the universities, we have limited our teaching to postgraduate teaching or only to research. All over the world, the brightest scientists or the brightest teachers, the brightest researchers, they have opportunity for doing research, teaching the first year undergraduate students also. This is not happening in our universities. We have the so-called affiliated college system in the country. Over 85% of our students are in the affiliated colleges.
How do you react to this new thrust, in a sense, to the privatization of higher education? Obviously, this is going to respond to the more immediate demand pull for courses that will earn salaries, the highest salaries for the graduates of these universities. And the larger values that you're talking about, and some of which you're implying, liberal arts education or Renaissance education or training of the mind, will further diminish, because this is going to shift the emphasis from publicly funded education, which might have this aspiration, to a purely market-driven system.
Again, this is a problem of mindset of the people. For example, if you just look at the Indian Institute of Science or Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, you can see that if you trace the history, you will see that they were private enterprises to start with. And therefore, we have to see that the credible private initiatives should be welcome in education. We cannot just depend on the public money for education only, but there has to be checks and balances. And even the so-called private institutions coming with commercial interests and all that, they will not survive forever. There's no doubt about it. Only those institutions which are offering quality education, looking at all aspects of knowledge, its generation, creation and its utilization, they will be surviving. Probably momentarily they will be creating some, getting some money, making some benefits and all that. And therefore, there is a need for curbing such initiatives, and then see that effective public-private participation has to be there in education. I am not against private.
Because interestingly, even private education, say in the West, in the United States, is not entirely commercial driven. It is run by philanthropists. It is run by public donations, public contributions, even as it is also financially viable. So it's not just a question of, is this going to yield a profit to the investor, and how are we going to break that nexus?
Yeah. Again, the fundamental researchers in fundamental sciences all over the world, they are financed by the biggest commercial enterprises, and they see that this long-term investment in fundamental sciences will ultimately yield. That thing is not happening so far in India. So private people or private initiatives, they should get some sort of a confidence that if they invest in fundamental sciences, if they invest in the real quality generating institutions, ultimately they will benefit. Such an atmosphere has to be created in the minds of the people, and then the system will definitely improve.
You're watching a conversation with Dr. Rajasekharan Pillai, scientist, former chairperson of the University Grants Commission, and the Vice Chancellor of IGNOU. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with the Vice-Chancellor of IGNOU and the former chairperson of the University Grants Commission, an eminent scientist, Dr. Rajasekharan Pillai. We were talking about science education. Tell me, as an eminent scientist, and we have the sort of the romanticism of the absent-minded professor, has it been very traumatic for you to be an administrator and the rough and tumble of vice chancellorship, of heading institutions, of dealing with unions, of raising money, of trying to resist political influences, and yet remain to your pure and committed to your core values?
Basically, I'm a teacher. I have been teaching for the last 36 years. Of course, I became the Vice Chancellor of a university at a very young age. But it's very important that those who are doing science, those who are teaching, they should also understand how the university has to be administrated, how education administration has to be done. Some of the things which you mentioned, these are the ground realities of the system in the country. It is not only a characteristic of the university system, it is happening in other sectors as well. But the problem with the university and collegiate education system in our country is that the teachers have to be sensitized. I sincerely believe that there is no job in a university which cannot be done by a teacher. And therefore, the administration of the university system or the collegiate education has to be considered as a teacher's job. And this teacher who is administering, he or she should also be definitely interacting with the students, doing research, all these things. So, in that respect, it has been a challenge to me working with the administration system as well. Of course, I had setbacks in administration in some cases and all that, but this added to my probably this strengthened my capabilities for facing more challenges.
You described yourself as a teacher, but when I read about your work and your writing and the number of citations that you've got for yourself, and I mean it's a common phenomenon in India that very often we celebrate the number of pieces that have been written rather than the value, the impact, or the relevance of what has been written. And I think that's where your writing and your work stands out. But you describe yourself as a teacher. Obviously, the two are interrelated, but what do you see yourself first as? A researcher, expanding the boundaries of knowledge, and then teaching, or teaching is the process that does it for you?
No, I think we cannot, a good teacher has to be a researcher as well. And by doing research and by guiding research students, you create a research mind, research culture in the system. For example, when I do research in a particular area, this will be reflected in my teaching, even though it's not part of the curriculum or anything.
Well, explain to us very briefly, because time always runs out, that you're working in the areas of polymers and peptides. Tell us in a few sort of simple layperson sentences, so that an ignoramus like me can understand your area of work.
Yeah, I work in the area of biopolymers. Polymers are big molecules, very big molecules. Biopolymers are the systems which provide structure and function in biological systems. When I say structure, the physical structure.
So when you say biological system, it's the human body?
Yeah, human body. For example, the physical structure itself, the physical structure is then created by biopolymeric systems. And then the functions, for example, thinking or digesting, all these things are functions. So the structure and function in the biological systems, human body or in the animal animal kingdom or in the plant kingdom, the structure and function are provided by these biopolymeric systems. I can give you some example. For example, cellulose. Cellulose is a biopolymer that provides the structural material of the vegetable kingdom. Similarly, keratin It's a protein. It is responsible for the hair structure.
That's something I could do with.
That's something.
But tell me that this patent that you've developed
Yes.
is for the production of something very, 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 very small that you only need in a few grams
That's right.
in the entire planet.
Yeah.
What is this, and what is its
Actually,
role?
there are a series of molecules known as neuropeptides. They are combinations of amino acids, 5 or 6 amino acids, or maximum 8 to 10 amino acids. They join together to form peptides. These peptides can be considered as smaller versions of proteins. For example, insulin, you might have heard of insulin. Insulin is a small protein comprising of two chains of combined amino acids, A chain and B chain, 21 amino acids, 32 amino acids. These neuropeptides are information carrier molecules, some parts of them. And many of these neuropeptide synthesis of some of the peptides are difficult. Laboratory synthesis of some of the peptides are difficult. From the nature, one can isolate these peptides. We can find out what is their structure, and then we know what is the biological function.
So you really developed the ability to synthesize this and in the laboratory, and that has now found commercial in applications. In a few years, and hopefully it'll be a long few years, a person who holds official position retires. But the scientist in him, the search for knowledge, the quest must remain. So what is your dream, your aspiration for yourself when you cease being an administrator in the official, let's say, government circumscribed scepters where they will ask you to resign one day or retire one day, not resign. What is your dream for yourself? Scientist, as an administrator?
I would like to work in the area of education and promoting science education, promoting the fundamental basic subjects.
And not retire into science?
No, not retire in science, because science education is very important in this country. So I will definitely concentrate on science education and provide and for creating opportunities for providing education. I sincerely believe that development of a country of this kind, we have to look at only two aspects: nutrition and education.
Thank you, Dr. Pillai. This has been a great privilege and a great learning.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.